So Joe has 20 years of experience in consumer marketing tactics and cross-functional approach to brand leadership. He has a broad skill set across media relations, channel strategy, branding, marketing, advertising, social media, investor relations, and crisis communications, all which probably play well into his current role. One day he decided that it might be fun to put those skills to use in helping to build the future of cannabis with Dixie Brands as Chief Marketing Officer. I like this part in his bio that he says, before his adventures on the green side. So there's a dark side, there's a green side, there's all kinds of different sides out there. But before his adventures on the green side, Joe served as a partner and executive vice president of channel management at Vladimir Jones, one of the largest and oldest independently held advertising agencies in Colorado. Prior to joining that firm, he served as VP Communications for a private equity firm, Consumer Capital Partners, where he oversaw communications for emerging brands such as Smashburger, as well as established names like Quiznos. He started and earned his PR chops as Senior Director of Corporate Communications for Frontier Airlines. As Frontier's primary spokesperson, he was the public face for the airline, coordinating all of Frontier's unpaid or earned media efforts. In addition, he oversaw their internal communications, investor relations, government relations, and community relations efforts. With that, help me welcome Joe to the front.
Thank you. Sometimes when you hear your bio read out loud, you just think, oh, I need to shorten that because that sounds ridiculous. So I think I'll have to go back and take another swing at that. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you being here. And, when Kyle and I first, where's Kyle? Where is he? Somewhere. When we first started talking about this, I said, do I need to prepare anything, presentation, whatever? And you said, no, just go up and talk. So that's literally what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and talk for a little bit, tell you a little bit about how I got into this industry, why I got into this industry, maybe some of the good and the bad about being in this industry. And then I'd love to, and we talked about this just before I got up here, I'd love to really hear your questions because I'm sure there are a lot of questions that you may have, either positive questions and some negative. I'm ready for all of those because I think that the hard questions are the ones that create some of the best dialogue. So I've been doing this for about 18 months now, and I was telling this story earlier. When I was with Vladimir Jones about 5 years ago, Dixie came to us through a young woman that worked for me and asked if we'd be interested in doing some brand work for them, and I was pretty excited to do that because it just sounded like a lot of fun, frankly. It was early on in the growth of the industry. It was 2010, so even though the legislation had passed many years prior, the infrastructure wasn't really in place until 2009, and then 2010 we began to see some dispensaries opening and the ability for companies like mine to begin to sell products. So it was very early on, one or two products really at that point. We now have 20 to 30 across about 100 different SKUs. And so I said, yeah, that's a great opportunity. Let's do that. So my agency ended up doing a little research for Dixie. We did the logo that Dixie currently uses. And we did a little bit of PR work. And that's really how I got to meet the company initially. But what was most fascinating to me was in the research. We began to really understand the consumer, people who were purchasing Dixie products or edible products in general. And I probably should back up and tell you exactly what we do. My bad. We actually, and I haven't consumed any cannabis, by the way, just to be clear on that. We are an edibles manufacturer. So we make edibles, topicals, tinctures, about, as I mentioned, 20 to 30 different products across 100 different SKUs. Our flagship product is our Elixir, which is a soda that we make in about 6 different flavors. But we make tinctures, we make mints, we make chocolates, so there's a number of different products as well as topicals that we make. Now, going back to my story, so we began to do some intercepts, understand who was going into the stores, why they were going into the stores, and it was fascinating to see the wide variety of people. And yeah, we saw that there were, Lyft operators from Breckenridge who, had back pain that were going into the dispensaries for marijuana, but we also saw 65-year-old grandmothers who legitimately had arthritis issues and were looking for topicals. We saw people who were using it for anxiety and social fears and phobias, just a wide variety of people. And so that's what really began to tip me off to the fact that there was a much wider consumer base than I think a lot of the public perception led us to believe. So fast forward, and legalization really looked like it was going to become a reality. We started to amp up our conversations, and ultimately we got to a point where I was offered a position with Dixie. And that's kind of really where my journey into understanding the industry and myself actually begins. And it ties a little bit to what Brian was talking about in opportunities, and I'll get to that in a second. But the first thing to note is that my kids were, I guess, devastated is a good word. They were besides themselves that I was taking this job, because I sat down with them, and I have a 6-year-old daughter, an 11-year-old boy, and a 13-year-old boy that were a year and a half younger than they are now when we first had this discussion. Now, my 6-year-old, she doesn't know what's going on. That's fine. We didn't have the talk. But my 2 boys, we sat down, and I said, listen, I've been given this opportunity, and I think I'm going to take it, and here's why. And they were in tears. They were really, really, really upset, because to them, it was pretty black and white, particularly my older one, because he is very much into sports and had seen so many of his the athletes that he admires getting busted for marijuana and being suspended. And so as far as he was concerned, marijuana equals drug equals bad, and that was the end of it. He's a very black and white kind of thinker, and they were in tears, and it was really hurtful, for me to have that conversation, knowing that honestly I'd made my decision. It wasn't as if I was asking their permission, because I did think about the conversation when he's 21, and I tell him that I could have been involved in this industry at the ground floor, and he'd look at me and go, well, what were you doing listening to a 13-year-old, taking advice from your 13-year-old, which probably wouldn't be the best idea. So I didn't listen to them, and I ultimately said to them, I'm going to move forward with this, and I promise you guys that that we'll have honest and open dialogue about this, and I'll share with you the things that I think are good, and if we think there's something bad, or there's something that I see that I don't want this industry doing, I'll work hard to make those changes. Because part of it was, I said, I can sit on the sidelines and watch this industry unfold, because it was going to happen regardless of whether I was involved, or I can be on the inside and maybe help affect change. And luckily, I've had opportunities to do that. So I've been involved with legislation and rules promulgation. I've been over the last 6 months on the CDPHE Education Campaign Committee. So if you guys have seen like the Good to Know campaign, they're just now rolling out this week, in fact, with the youth prevention campaigns, in-school programs. I've been involved with helping to shape those messages in that campaign. Those are the opportunities and the things that I was really most excited about getting involved with when I first started doing this. But I've also come to realize that there is not only an opportunity from a financial standpoint, because that's clear, and I was mentioning earlier that sometimes that's actually a double-edged sword, because I think people believe that we are throwing cash in the air and everyone's rolling in the dollars, and that's just not true. I mean, the regulations and the things that we do to reinvest in our companies, none of us are making tons of money yet. It's just not happening that way. But it's there. I know that ultimately, some of these things will fall into place, and once it becomes a little bit more common and banking gets fixed, or the federal government changes some of the rules and regs, then the opportunity, I think, will become much more real. But the opportunity that I wanted to really harp on today is the idea of social change. And I think a lot of people forget the fact that there are a tremendous number, upwards of, and please don't quote me on this because I might be wrong, but I think it's upwards of 700,000 that are incarcerated throughout all states for the nonviolent crime of drug possession. Much of that is marijuana. Much of that is focused on young men of color. And when you think about legalization, people often say, well, that they shouldn't necessarily be in prison. And I believe that decriminalization makes sense. But I kind of think that decriminalization doesn't exist. Well, it can't exist without legalization. And the reason being is if you decriminalize, all you're basically doing is you're giving free rein to the existing system, which is underground, which is drug dealers, which is no IDs, which is no tracking, which is no safety and security. You still have all the same issues. You're just not putting people in jail, which is important to not put them in jail. But with legalization and companies like Dixie, it actually helps to, I think, create a stronger, safer system within which we can all function. So my point is that the social change that I feel like we're part of, and you may say that that's me just convincing myself of the greater social good for what we do, and at the end of the day, we sell marijuana, and I get that. I don't lose sight of that point, but I do believe that if we continue to do the right things and demonstrate a responsible industry and put the right safeguards in place that allow this industry to become legal on a national level, think about what happens to all those people who maybe in the future would have been put in prison. Their lives would have been taken off track. They wouldn't have a chance to be with their families. They wouldn't have a chance to be productive parts of society and add value to our communities as a whole, because they'd be in prison for a quarter of an ounce of marijuana. And even if it was only a short period of time, right? And then they have an arrest record, or they miss work that day because they had to go to court, and so suddenly they don't have a job any longer. So then they become part of the unemployed, and then become part of the homeless problem. There are so many issues that I think stem from the war on drugs that I think oftentimes the greatest benefit to this is not just people's personal freedoms and the ability to get high or to use medicine for whatever ailments that you have that it can help with, which are numerous. I'm not even going to talk about the medical side of it right now, but it's really the ability to affect social change on a national level. That's what really excites me, and I think it's going to take a long time. There's a lot of work to do, and there are also bad players, right? And we in Colorado over the last couple of years have done a decent job of beginning to and by the way, you can't talk about marijuana without accidentally making puns, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it, without weeding out a lot of the nefarious characters and bad players, and you're left with the good ones, those who want to follow regulation, those who want to do things the right way, and you get a strong system. I don't know if anybody happened to see the announcement from Forbes today. Anybody see that?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'll tell you. Well, but I'll tell the rest of you. So Forbes came out with their ranking of best cities for business. Denver was number one. I think it was the first time Denver's been number one. I think they were number 4 previously. And I can tell you that when I first got into this, I knew a lot of people, in city government, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, with tourism, and all of them said, this is going to be the downfall of our community. We're not going to attract tourists. We're not going to attract business. We're not going to be able to sustain this. And I think today, as well as a half dozen other points that I could throw out there, I can argue that that hasn't been the case, right? Society hasn't fallen apart. If anything, we've gotten stronger, right? I think we have innovation here. I think we have a very strong can-do character and attitude. I think you've seen a change even in Governor Hickenlooper's stance on marijuana and whether or not it was a good idea, bad idea, but ultimately that we've done it and we've done it well. And I think we've become a model on an international level. I know for a fact because I hear from people internationally about Colorado and what we're doing here. So I think from my perspective, that's something to pat ourselves in the back for, and I think it's actually creating opportunity. There's a reverse side to everything, right? And Brian talked about, for example, real estate and the cost of real estate and the fact that it squeezes people out when industrial real estate prices go up because there's a need from the growers. But it also adds money to the economy. It also spurs additional building and development. So there's two sides to that coin, and I think overall, if we look at the impact, I believe, and I'd be curious to know anyone else's input on it, but it's had a pretty positive impact in this community, in the state, as well as in the city of Denver. So my 18-month immersion in this industry has been interesting, and one of the things I've learned about myself, I started a blog, by the way. The first week I started this job, I thought, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to keep track of every single thing that happens because it's going to be fascinating. I'm going to journal this whole thing and share my story. And I think I've posted about 3 times in the last 18 months because I found out that there's actually a lot of work to be done, and I seem to be running out of time to make those posts. But it's been an interesting journey for me personally to realize how to take risk. I'm a pretty risk-averse person. I used to think when I was younger that I wasn't a conservative guy. I was willing to take risks. But the older you get, the more you start to get introspective, and you realize, well, I really haven't taken a whole lot of risks. I mean, sure, you could say, I guess, having 3 kids is taking a risk, but that feels risky every day. But in terms of my career, in terms of financially, I've not really taken any big risks. Well, this was the first really big one that I took, and I look at some of the things I do on a day-to-day basis, and I think about my friends or people that I know professionally, and I think, I don't think they could do this. Honestly, the things I do, and I'm not saying that in a egotistical way. I mean in the sense that I do some weird stuff on a regular basis that doesn't occur in other businesses because of the nature of the business that I'm in and the nature of the immaturity of our business, and also just in the fact that it's a very unique industry. So there are things that I partake in that I wouldn't be doing elsewhere, and I certainly know if I told my friends, they'd kind of be a little shocked and surprised about it. Everything from, you know, the office culture to, you know, I had to make a purchase of 100 pounds of trim the other day. That trim, by the way, is the term that we use for the parts that are around the flower, which is what people smoke. The trim is what we use to extract oil to make our products. It costs less than the flower, but is fairly productive in terms of THC content. So, you know, I made my first big drug deal. It was kind of a revelation for me. I'm sure Cherry's laughing because she's, you know, it's de rigueur for her, but for me, you know, it was interesting because I had not done that before. So all of those things are learning experiences, and you know, I think that ultimately we're all heading in the right direction. We're all trying. The people that we associate with as a company, the people that we do business with, all of them are trying to do the best and right thing to move the industry forward. I don't see very many people that are looking to game the system, that are doing things illegally, or that don't welcome regulation. We were talking earlier about California. My company just announced that we were going to launch in California this month. California had not been on our radar primarily because they lack regulation. We didn't want to be in a market that didn't have regulation. Luckily, we found a really good partner, and we believe that regulation is heading rapidly in the right direction for California, and that they ultimately will legalize and create a whole infrastructure in 2016. But we believe that regulation is our friend, and we welcome it, as do most of the people that we work with.